I'd like to call to order the Monday, October 3rd, 2022 Rules Committee meeting. Can we start off with our roll?
You want to do a roll call? Mayor Biss,
Here.
Councilmember Herrick Harris,
Here.
Councilmember Reed,
Here.
Councilmember Ravel,
Here.
Councilmember Sufferton,
Here.
Councilmember Burns,
Here.
Councilmember Nusma,
Here.
Councilmember Wynn's not here, Councilmember Harris,
Present.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, since we have a quorum, we can move on to public comment. Do we have anyone here in person who would like to make a public comment? Okay, seeing that we have no one in person, we received 2 emails for public comment. One from Dick Malone, who's the Executive Director of the Center for Independent Futures, and he wrote in support of item R3 on our agenda tonight. And then we also heard from Tricia Connolly, who wrote about R2 and R3 in support of both, and also wanting the city to provide a status update on the status of the Commission on Aging. And so, seeing that we're through public comment, let's move on to item RM1, approval of the Rules Committee meeting minutes. Can someone make a motion?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Considering we have people online, we can take, do you have any discussion on the meetings? Minutes? Okay. So I guess we can take our roll call vote.
Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Herrick Harris.
Aye.
Mayor Biss.
Aye.
Okay, so the ayes have it, so that passes. And let's move on to item R1, approval of the 2023 City Council meeting schedule.
So moved. Or I'll move approval.
Okay?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Okay, let's take a vote.
Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Herrick Harris.
Aye.
Mayor Biss.
Aye.
Okay, that passes. So let's move along to item R2, amending the City Council Rule R7 to add additional council members to the Referrals Committee. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Okay, and then any discussion? Okay, we have Councilmember Burns.
I've talked to most everybody here, so I will save you the long explanation that most of you received on the phone call today. And I'll say, basically what this comes down to is it seems like there's kind of support from some council members on 2 different options. One is doing what we often do with committees where committee members are determined by seniority, where there's a rotation, either a rotation of the chair of its members. So if the true intent is to have a kind of a selected small group of 3, then we can still maintain a small select group of committee members. But again, to have fairness, we could rotate the committee members every 3 months, 6 months, whatever is supported of this group. I think the other option that I've heard some support for is striking the exception. Again, and make it fair so that a small select group of senior council members aren't determining in lieu of 2 co-sponsors which items are worth even discussing, again, especially before we've had a chance to research it, read through a memo and understand what really is being proposed, but that we can strike the exception and it's just a fair blanket rule You need 2 co-sponsors for any agenda item, for any referral to make it on the agenda. It's a rule, and again, a select group of referrals committee members are not making that determination of when an exception is to be applied. So it's just a fair rule, no exceptions, or we rotate committee members.
Okay, next we have Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I think that we, I was the lone no vote against this amendment, against the original amendment to the Referrals Committee. I think expanding the Referrals Committee makes sense to make the committee more representative of the city as a whole, and to ensure that we aren't creating barriers to council members and the mayor and folks who elected them to doing what they were elected to do. And so I support either one of those amendments. I think if I think we should expand the committee, and I think if we're going to have a rule that folks need co-sponsors, it should be a hard and fast rule that applies to everyone, that is not selectively enforced. And again, I want to note, this idea that, as the person who's made the most referrals, I mean, we've seen it in Evanston now. I've done some analysis on my referrals. I think it's critical that we have discussions and that we don't take folks, particularly as a council member from literally a marginalized community, right? I represent the community with the largest black population in the city. I represent a ward with some of the lowest income neighborhoods in our city. I personally am a young African-American male who is queer. I represent underrepresented communities, and for a committee of 3 people who represent none of the communities that I represent to pass on a referral that I made, or the Councilmember Burns, Kelly, or anybody else up here made through the democratic process, to me, it reminds me of the values that I think most Evanston residents would espouse or would be firmly against. It reminds me of, if I'm going to use an analogy of the Republicans in Congress and Mitch McConnell being able to use the power that they have to block at the end of President Obama's term the appointment of a Supreme Court justice that he had every right to appoint. We should not be using our committees to mimic the worst aspects of our democracy. We should be using committees to work collaboratively and try to, as I've said before, and I think many of us agree with this, try to get to yes with our colleagues. I look at this process and I think, as I mentioned before, that there's some referrals personally that I've made that I think folks that I know folks have batted a few eyes at, and have wondered, burglars tools, why would we change our burglars tools ordinance? Well, when we went through the process, we determined, hey, actually it was found unconstitutional decades ago. We've had a lot of debate in some committees about the public nudity ordinance. And I think, based on the Equity Empowerment Commission's review of it, based on some more informed community discussion and the tone and tenor of recent articles, such as the Roundtable article about this, that are doing really good coverage on this issue and not sensationalizing it, I think the tone of the conversation is changing. We're learning something, right? And I think at the beginning of those processes, we would have just said, no, this all sounds crazy. But when we go through the process, when we allow for the democratic process to take place, when we allow for debate, there's oft clarong, there is enlightenment to be found in that discussion. And so I think we're taking the wrong approach by moving in a direction to limit the ability of elected representatives to do and to exercise the one power that we actually have, which is the legislative power. So I think in order to rectify that, either we have to have a rule that applies evenly across the board, such as Councilmember Burns has just referenced, making it a hard and fast rule that that everyone requires 2 co-sponsors to get something through, or And I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both. And I think we need to expand the referrals committee or rotate the referrals committee. And I heard, Councilmember Burns reference, it must have been from conversations earlier that, we created the referrals committee based on seniority, which, we didn't. When we had the discussion about the referrals committee, there was no discussion about seniority. It was somewhat of an it wasn't really an open call, but I do think this committee, holding the power that we are seeking to grant to it, needs to be expanded and needs to be certainly more representative of Evanston as a whole and more representative of the diversity of this council. Thank you.
Okay. We have Councilmember Revelle.
Well, I think it's important to clarify that when the referrals committee got started, we were a brand-new entity and, really developing the whole process from scratch. And what we found after the first few months was, we basically referred all the issues that came to us to various committees, but that didn't necessarily mean that they appeared on a committee agenda. So several months ago, I don't remember how long ago, we charged Allison Leipziger with the role of following up to make sure that any of these items that we referred actually got placed on the agenda of that committee. So I think it's a misperception to say that the referrals committee is not allowing issues to get out of the committee and go to a committee. So I guess that's point number one. And number two, I'd be comfortable with Councilmember Burns' suggestion that all referrals need the two co-sponsors. I think that would be a good way to demonstrate that there's council interest in the particular issue and that it warrants whatever research staff might have to make to develop the memo to support a productive discussion when it actually comes onto a committee agenda. So I think that would be certainly a way to ensure that we're being fair and democratic.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like Mayor Biss has his light on for the first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just also would be completely comfortable amending the item that is currently awaiting a vote at council to say everything would require two co-sponsors to get heard by a committee, whether it's a referral made by myself or a member of city council or the city manager. I think that's reasonable and appropriate, and if we can agree to do that in lieu of R2 the way it's written, it's something that I'm comfortable getting on board with.
Okay. I have Councilmember Burns. Do you have a second?
If there's somebody else before me who hasn't spoken, I will.
No, it's back to you.
Oh, it's back to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you
You
did.
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
Sorry, mic on there. I'll get behind the two co-sponsor motion. I just want to clarify the problem we're trying to solve here in trying to define that. Why do we even have the referrals process? It's not to weigh in my opinion, on the validity of a referral, whether a particular referral is right or wrong. Really, the importance of the referrals committee process is to help us decide what's worth spending our time on. We have limited time. We have limited money. We have, and that applies to staff. That applies to the city council members. We have limited bandwidth, so we can't do everything all at once, even if everything's a good idea. And so the role of the referrals committee is to kind of triage and say, yeah, this is really important. We need to do this sooner rather than later. And maybe there's another idea that comes in that might be worthy of consideration, but it's not a super pressing issue. And that's the role that I expect the referrals committee to play. And I think with a 3-vote or a 3 a sponsor and 2 co-sponsor requirement, I think we can play that role effectively by keeping the committee membership as it is. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So now it goes back to Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, I'm good. I don't need to. I'm good.
And do we have Councilmember Reed? Do you still have your light on?
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like the adults from Charlie Brown. It's like the womp, 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 womp. I made this amendment last time and it was voted down. So I'm fully supportive of that. I still think that R2 has merit, so I'm supportive of where we are going. I've been supportive of that since the beginning of this, and that's why I voted no on the proposal initially the last time I was here. I still think that the Referrals Committee needs to be more representative of the community as a whole. I do not think that the understanding Evanston's history, again, this is nothing on the current council members or the mayor that are on that committee, but understanding our history and understanding human nature, when we give a committee this much power, understand that this makeup may not always be in power. And in 3 years, when we elect a new council, the dynamics could completely change, and folks who are supportive of this could be in a minority, and their referrals, given the way this committee is shaping up, this committee could be used to block really important things that people who are now, potentially in the majority, if you will, or a splintered majority, may not like what happens with the new council. And so we should be building policy that survives that level of scrutiny. And I as someone who is, again, I've mentioned him before, huge fan of our first our first black alderman in Evanston, Alderman Jourdain. If we had these rules in place then, with this kind of limited, control over what referrals are deemed valid and not valid, we would not have seen a lot of the progress that we saw in the 1930s and 40s. Because the council, as it was comprised then, was so divided and so malicious against minority viewpoints that they quite literally in 1932 illegally voted to remove a member of their a duly elected member of the council from the body. And so this is, I wish we had more perspective. I wish that even, Mayor Bissett and the people who are supporting this, I wish that we had some data supporting this, some data to say, here's the staff time that is, quote unquote, being consumed by these referrals. Here is the, potential stress or burden that is being placed on the system from these referrals. And we just haven't seen that. We even had a Human Services Committee meeting that would have taken place today before this committee, or after, actually, this committee, that was canceled because there weren't enough items on that agenda. And so I wish there was just more data backing this up. And I just personally want to note that, of the referrals that I have made, for example, I've gone back and looked at the data, and of the referrals that I have made that have come up for a vote and have been considered, I think over 60% of them have passed, and with more to come. So, I think this idea that there are ideas that are without merit from an elected representative of our small town, I think is not a valid idea. And, there could be some validity to it, but I think there'd be more evidence or more data that would need to be put forth in order to truly make that case. And so I'm hoping that we can get to a place where we begin to trust each other and value each other's ideas and work as true interlocutors to get to yes or get to a solution that meets the needs of the broadest section of our community. So thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Ravel, did you have your light on or no? Okay. Councilmember Burns.
And only because it was just asked to me by text. But so, and also just for the community members watching, and then I guess also for the media's benefit, because I didn't explain this going into it, that my referral was, I think, to allow up to 5 council members to join this committee. That's consistent with human services, plan and development, on and on. The people who we've been very liberal with who's able to serve on our committees. If you want to serve on the committee, you're allowed to. If the rules state that there is a committee member restriction as far as the amount of committee members, we've been happy to waive that, or to not to waive it, but to change our rules to allow for more committee members. And so the referral that is on our agenda was really about putting this more in line with, I think, what the rules even currently allow for, that, but up to 5. I think it's restricted to 3 now. And speaking with my colleagues before this meeting, and although I think the R2 as it's written is the best course of action, from speaking to my colleagues, it seems like before the meeting, it seems like there was varying support for 2 different options. And one of those options is not what I referred. So the 2 options, again, to repeat, were either having a rotated referrals committee, restricting it to 3 council members, but rotating who sits on that committee. And then it seems like what there's, I think, a majority support for tonight is to not do that, but instead to remove the exception. So as it's written currently, what we adopted as a council rules committee is that in lieu of 2 co-sponsors, the referrals committee can make an exception, right? 3 senior, in some ways, at least in my opinion, select group of 3 council members in perpetuity will make a decision on in lieu of 2 co-sponsors. And it sounds like that's removing that ability for the referrals committee to make an exception and just making it a hard rule that you need 2 co-sponsors for a referral to make its way on an agenda. It sounds like what there's support for currently. To Councilmember Kelly's question that you asked me, I support rotating, but I don't know if there's enough support to do that. So that's why I wanted to provide two different options.
Okay. Seeing. Okay. Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I'm not going to give some diatribe this time. I do want to move to, I think we should at least have a rotation on this committee. I think we should have at least obviously the mayor would stay on the committee as the chair indefinitely, but I do think the council members on this committee should rotate on an annual basis. I think that makes sense with a committee that has this kind of power and influence over the process, or the power should just come to the rules committee as a whole. I mean, I don't know. We could all just look at it and decide whether or not it moves forward. But at a minimum, if we are set on having this referrals committee that specifically looks at referrals, I think it should rotate on an annual basis. And Councilmember Burns' point of information, that's not currently a part of this proposal, correct? The annual rotation is not a part of it. So I'd like to move, if there isn't support potentially to expand the membership, and it seems like there may not be based on the conversation that was had, I'd like to amend this to make this make it an annual rotation of the committee membership. So I move that amendment.
Okay. We have Mayor Biss is up next.
I just want to flag something before this motion is seconded. Just pulled up the rules, and I'm looking at Rule 9.3A. The Rules Committee, this body, has full jurisdiction over appointing members to all the standing committees. Doesn't treat referrals any different than P&D or APW or Human Services. They're all treated the same. The thing that's different is that the Referrals Committee didn't exist at the beginning of this council when the rotation got created. So we don't need a rule change to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, Councilmember Reed. If you want to come back to the next Rules Committee with a rotation plan for us to vote on, I think that makes perfect sense. We could treat it like the other standing committees. But I don't, there's no reason to write into the rules that there shall be a rotation. That's a decision that we could make at any time, that we could have made on day one of Referrals Committee existing. We could do it right now if we had the kind of ability to do a rotation off the top of our head, which I think is an incredibly bad idea because we wind up with sticky notes and easels, and it would be a whole thing. Or we could just do it at the next meeting of the Rules Committee. I don't think that this motion is actually the way to do what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I see your point. But what is different, and as Councilmember Burns pointed out, is with every other committee, we allow for anyone who wants to serve on that committee to serve on that committee. This is the only committee, and we're even willing to expand membership to allow someone to serve on a committee. And this is the one committee where it appears that we are unwilling to expand membership. I've heard several folks today say that they're I'm not hearing the exact reason. I remember the reasons, during the initial discussion, not hearing it today, but that folks want to keep this committee at 3 members. That's not the case for Human Services. That's not the case for or any of our other standing committees, for P&D, for APW. Anyone who wanted to be on those committees could join. And so that is, my reasoning for including, if we're going to keep this committee limited to 3, I think it is important that, it's clear in the rules that if it's only 3 people, that we will have a regular rotation. I don't think we need to, I'm fine with your suggestion. I don't think we needed to necessarily lay out a rotation schedule, but, at the end of a year, allow folks to, whoever wants to serve, to fill, apply for the vacancy and be nominated and voted on by their colleagues. But I'm happy to maybe come back with a rotation schedule.
Councilmember Burns.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think even at the top of my comments, I've conceded that the rules, other than the restricted, membership, the rules suggest that this is similar to other committees, but I think from conversations I've had with my colleagues, we still would need to support a rotation at some point whenever that schedule was made, and I'm not confident there's support to do that. I hope that's the case, and hopefully that's what we're indicating today. But what I've gathered is that there's not only a desire for some of our colleagues for this to remain three council members, but in addition to that there may not be support to rotate. And so again, I understand, I've conceded that looking at the rules, it seems as though this is the same as other committees and that we're going to be just as liberal as we have with other committees with this one, but it doesn't feel that way based on my conversation. So, I'm not necessarily convinced we need to make an amendment to say rotation, but I just want to get that out there. I wish we were just treating this like every other committee, but it doesn't feel or appear that way, which is why I think Councilman Reed is saying let's make sure that it is in the rules that we will rotate on an annual basis.
All right, so it looks like we are through discussion. There was a motion.
I'd move to table this if recognized by the chair.
Okay. There's a motion to table from Councilmember Reed. Is there a second?
So just to clarify, Mr. Chair, the original motion was made to amend. If there's no second, that fails, and then this motion to table will be in order. If there is a second, I just need clarity as to what exactly we're amending so that the law department can actually.
There's no motion. It wasn't seconded, and I withdraw that motion.
Thank you.
Okay. So just to clarify, so the amendment was withdrawn, and now there was a motion to table, and we had.
And I'm sorry, Councilmember Revelle, just point. And my reason for tabling this, I would like to amend and then table, but to guarantee that this discussion comes back to the next Rules Committee, whether it's with a new rotation schedule or whatever the case may be, but just to ensure that this issue is on the next agenda and there's some buy-in, a vote from everyone indicating that we are committed to actually creating a real rotation schedule. That is my reasoning for tabling this and having it come back as, either with or as a rotation schedule to achieve, I think, the ultimate goal of this resolution, which was to create some equity on the referrals committee process.
Okay, so we still have the motion to table, and did I have a second? Second, okay. Roll call vote?
Mayor Biss,
Aye.
Councilmember Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel,
Aye.
Councilmember Suffredin,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma,
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen is not here, Councilmember Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
So it is tabled till next month. Now we will, we have item R3. Is there a motion?
So moved. I move ordinance 107022, amending Title II, Chapter 3 of the City Code, amending the name of the Commission on Aging to the Commission on Aging and Disabilities.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Seeing none. Oh. Councilmember Ravel.
I'll just say I think it's a really important idea, and really glad that this is being brought to our attention.
Yes, I concur. So seeing no other discussion, can we take a vote?
Mayor Biss,
Aye.
Councilmember Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel,
Aye.
Councilmember Suffredin, Councilmember Suffredin, must have stepped away, Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma,
Aye.
Councilmember Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
So that motion passes. Let's go on to R4, Ordinance 109022, amending City Code Title II, Chapter 6, Social Services Committee.
So moved.
Okay, can we do a second? Okay. Any discussion on this one? Seeing none, can we take a vote?
Councilmember Kelly, Councilmember Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Suffredin, Councilmember Ravel,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Councilmember Harris,
Aye.
Mayor Biss.
Aye.
All right, that passes. Then let's go on to our last item on the docket, D1, communication support for council members.
So moved.
Can I have a second? Let's open the floor for discussion. Councilmember Burns.
Again, I've talked to many of you here about this, so I'll just make some brief comments about this. So I guess where to start is that this is really an expansion of what we, this is looking to expand what we already provide to support council members. So we currently support council members with professional development. I just went to a wonderful conference in Columbus, Ohio, that was paid for by the city of Evanston to learn about all types of things, and brought back some really good information, and have had some really good discussions, and there are existing projects that will benefit from my time spent in Columbus, and Kara Pratt also was there. And we also have a set aside for internet access as well as other things. So I don't want folks to look at this as if it's not a continuation of what we already provide to support council members in our work. I think there is a very clear deficit. I have surveyed not only council members who are here sitting alongside me, but also those from previous administrations who have all said that they have went into their pockets for to advance, work of the city, work of and to forward our responsibilities as council members, specifically in the area of communications. And Councilmember Reed, of course, I believe, made a referral to look at increasing our compensation, our salary, which we will look at that at a later date. But we'll see where we land on that issue. I think even more than a salary adjustment, what I found kind of deeply concerning and inappropriate, frankly, is that any council member would have to go in their pocket for communication support, whether it's translation services, help with newsletters, help with award announcements, help with spotlighting businesses, help with summarizing award meetings, whatever the case may be. We should have the funding to do it well, and to create a minimum standard of engagement and communications with our wards, and we don't have that. I understand there are interns out here that can do all types of things, and volunteers. Even that takes time to organize and to sustain. Someone like myself, I sit on every committee but equity empowerment. I do not have time to write a sentence. I do it, but I really do not have the time to write a sentence of a newsletter. It's taking away precious time that I would rather be spending with my family and preparing for these meetings, right, which is difficult enough to do. I need help. And it is, interns are not enough, volunteers are not enough. I need, in the same way that we support council members with professional development and other things I've described, we need help in this area. And it's not just me. I would imagine the majority of us up here have experienced this. We should not have to go in our pocket to do this work. And so I'll stop there because I've talked about all the details with you all, but I want to be very clear. I need help. I need support to do this work well. And this number came from the fact that in Chicago, each alderman is given, probably between $200,000 and $250,000 for staff support. They represent about 50,000 people in each ward. Roughly speaking, we represent collectively 78 to 80,000. I'm not suggesting that each council member should receive $200,000. What I've said is set aside a fund, $150,000. Each of us would be allowed to use up to $15,000 for this, but you don't have to use it. If you don't want to use it, if you don't see the benefit, if you can't justify this to your constituents, don't use it. But for those of us who, like myself, who have brought this up in ward meetings, and this has support from my ward for those who need it, allow us the funding to use it. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to. And then we can divert that money for some other purpose. So that is all. Thank you.
Okay. I have one quick comment on this. I think, me personally, I have a Spanish interpreter at all my ward meetings, and that's something I pay out of pocket for their time. And I think it's something like me personally, I would like to put out more communications if I could, but definitely could use help on that. Anyone else have any comments? Councilmember Newsma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is a tough job, and I could use some help as well. Not only with communication, but with policy, research, policy analysis. I think a better way to accomplish this is by hiring permanent staff to support City Council, rather than allowing council members a discretionary budget to spend as we see fit. I think developing some internal capabilities that can support this council for the next 2.5 years, and then the next council after this council turns over, I think that's a better way to spend the money. And City Manager Stowe and I have initiated a conversation about kind of reinvigorating an intern program, which I'm not going to put Luke on the spot right now because it was just an idea that we kind of mentioned a few weeks ago. But I think there are ways we can we can do this more efficiently than allowing us what amounts to, $1,250 a month for communications. We get $75 a month for technology, which is great. That helps pay my cell phone bill. But $1,250 a month for communications strikes me as a lot, and I think it's probably better use of taxpayer money to hire additional communications staff or city council support staff. But I do agree that there is a need for some assistance with this job for sure.
Okay, thank you. And then we have Councilmember Reed.
Yes, I appreciate your comments, Councilmember Newsoma. I do think there's a need for additional staff, but I also do think that each of us have unique wards, unique ways of communicating with our residents, and having a fund. Again, this wouldn't be a stipend that would go to the council member. So the comparisons to the, technology fund.
A little bit
payout
different
or
in that
whatever
regard,
it is.
true.
Yeah, this would be something that would be internal. The city manager would be like any other staff member requesting funds, but it would allow us flexibility to communicate with our residents in a way that each of us sees as most effective and most, as I said, effective for our particular communities. And, what works in the 4th Ward may not work in the 8th. What works in the 7th may not work in the 1st. So I support this. I think we should move forward with it. And allow that flexibility for each of us to communicate in the ways that are most effective in our particular wards.
Okay, and we have Councilmember Ravel.
Well, I'd like to distinguish between general assistance to the council members and the need for someone to do the translation assistance. I think as a council, we need to come to grips with providing, addressing the translation issue, because I think we have a lot of community members and a lot of meetings where we need to be having someone available to do that translation service. And so I'm a little horrified that our colleague here is paying for that out of his pocket. So I guess I'd like us to brainstorm at some point about how to pay for that service in general for the community. And then I guess I like Councilmember Newsoma's idea of having this be possibly someone permanently on the city staff who provides the support for the council. And I guess my last point would be I'd like to be weighing this decision when I'm looking at the whole 2023 budget, because I think we're going to have a lot of trade-offs that we need to make. $150,000 is, could be another different kind of staff person, so I'm uncomfortable. I mean, I know this is just for discussion today, but maybe this is direction to city manager in terms of what kinds of options he presents to us as part of the 2023 budget.
Okay, thank you. And Councilmember Burns.
Just to go point by point, so it's in rules because the referrals committee referred it here. I just want to make that clear. And I don't sit on referrals, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the reason why the recommendation from the referrals committee was that it show up in Q4 was to make sure we were having it alongside our budget discussion. I didn't send it to rules. Even today, I'm not necessarily looking for a vote on this item as much as it is support to move this forward to our budget, to our city council meeting, so we can discuss it as part of our budget discussions, which is probably what I would have preferred anyway. But again, I think it was the rules committee that determined that it needed to come here first. So I just wanted to say that it's here today because the referrals committee, I think, recommended it be here. Additionally, there's no indication that bringing on additional staff will cost less than this. Frankly, I think it would cost more than this to have salary benefits for 1 or 2 people. 135, come on, like it's going to cost. What I'm hearing proposed will cost more than this. So again, just to walk people back through how this got here is that I made the referral. And by the way, Councilmember Newsome, we have a policy coordinator. So for your policy considerations, you should contact Allison Lepsinger. That's our policy person. That's why I narrowly focus this around communication support, although research was a concern for me initially through conversations that I had with Allison Lepsinger, and then we also met with Patrick Degnan, our communications. I'm not sure of his official title, but I know he's part of our communications team. And Kelly Gandersky, who was the interim city manager at the time, was that Allison is our policy coordinator. That is the person that we're supposed to go to help support our policy initiatives. So this isn't that. That is actually addressed already in our budget, while this is not addressed. And so, again, I think this would cost less. It would, when we discussed it, again, Kelly Gandersky, myself, Allison Lepsinger, and Patrick Degnan, when we discussed this, the reason why we went away from adding an additional staff person, in addition to just costing more, is that there's no way that one or two people are going to be able to cover all wards. And so this gives us the flexibility to have someone or a group of people, because as Councilman Reed said, these are really just contractors or vendors or whatever it is that provide a service. It may change. One person, if we hire one or two people, and I need them to cover a ward meeting so that they can summarize it. Again, I'm not saying everybody wants that. That's the beauty of this. If you don't want it, you don't have to use it. But I want that person may not be available. They may not even be available after hours. Who's to say that this individual will work beyond the regular 9 to 5 workday? So this gives us the flexibility to go out in the community, perhaps even go out in our own wards, find people who are already maybe active and participating, or groups of people, and hire them to take on kind of a greater level of responsibility when they're available. And so this is likely going to be cost less than what I'm hearing being proposed an alternative, and it allows us the flexibility, I think, to really make sure that the individual and unique needs of council members are satisfied by this. And then I just, again, want to highlight that I'm not looking for a vote, a yes or no today. I think this is for discussion. All I would ask is if we can forward this to City Council so we can consider it alongside our other budget considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Biss.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The reason the Referrals Committee sent this here was because of what was to the Referrals Committee a completely unanswered question mark about the kind of legal ramifications of this type of decision. I think it's unlike anything we have in the city in that it seems to be the creation of like kind of a pot of money that is under the jurisdiction of elected officials, utilized to procure staff time that would be answering to elected officials. And so we were just trying to figure out what that meant. Is how do you structure that? Is it legal? The analogy to Chicago, I think, is totally unconstructive because they have a different form of government, and as a result of that, the council members have a different set of responsibilities and different set of expectations. And it's totally normal in that form of government for staff to report to elected officials. Our situation here is somewhat different.
I just, as a quick rebuttal, just want to say that the way this would be designed, and I think, again, at the time, this was by the recommendation of our interim city manager, is that we would not have control over this as a city council. This is a budget that would sit in the city manager's office, that a vendor, a contractor, somebody providing services to a council member could access in any way a vendor would. So they would request compensation from our purchasing department for work performed for council members. And I think in a call earlier with Councilmember Ravel, the idea what she would like to see, if this was something that we ended up moving forward with, is that the work would be approved on the front end by the city manager. Hey, I would like help doing this. And then that would initiate the work. The person would do it, and then they would again submit for payment with our purchasing department. So just to be clear, this would not be under the control of the council.
Okay, Councilmember Newsome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Somewhat related to this, and maybe actually identical to this, is a policy that we don't have regarding what personal expenses are reimbursable. So whether we're, in my case, paying for some flyers that I passed out myself, or Councilmember Hedekade is paying for translation services, some of these expenses that we are incurring personally might be reimbursable to the city. And so I'm going to suggest, we take a look at defining a policy that delineates what expenses may or may not be reimbursable, maybe putting a dollar amount on that, and that may be a way to get to get to the same place this proposal is going.
Okay, let's start to wrap this up, but Councilmember Reed?
Yeah, 2 points. So we do have a policy that states that it's in our rules already. It says travel is reimbursable. Similar to the conference that Councilmember Burns went to. We have the cell phone expense that's built in, and then essentially nothing else is. And when I say travel, I specifically mean going to a conference or attending a conference, not as much as I would like. Maybe my Lyft and Ubers from home to council would be nice to have covered. But and I also think that it creates, if we just do reimbursements, there are times I am just a council member and a student right now. I'm not working outside of that, and I could not afford I'm living on a very fixed income. I probably couldn't afford to go to certain conferences and even have it reimbursed. And so making funds available for council members, using an equity lens, particularly as we want to diversify this council and see, more people who are even more representative of the multiple facets of our community, including on the lower income scale. I think making funds available that have a specific use to help us reach out to our community and keep residents informed is something that makes sense. And, we shouldn't have, council members who are more affluent and wealthier able to do more outreach because they have the resources, and those of us who aren't, and those of us who are poor and maybe so poor that they can't afford the that those folks should have the same ability to or at least from the city's perspective have an equal playing field when it comes to official communication from city council members to their ward. And so that's why I think this has merit, and we'll be supportive of this moving forward.
Okay, we have Councilmember Kelly with their first comment.
So I just wanted to comment regarding Chicago, and that it is somewhat similar and is somewhat constructive. I'm not advocating one way or the other right now, but Lightfoot did this year give each council member $100,000 spending money however they wanted to use it. Ours would obviously, what Councilmember Burns is proposing, would have much tighter parameters and obviously much less. But each council member was given a sweetener of $100,000 to spend as they like. So there is some somewhat comparable. Thank you.
And Councilmember Burns.
I would just say that we need to be very, it's one thing to hire an equity coordinator, which hopefully we're doing soon, and have an equity commission, but we need to live it. And generally, I don't even know if it's generally, maybe always, but generally reimbursement policies are not equitable. As Councilmember Reed, I think, mentioned just a moment ago, because you have to pay it on the front end. And everybody does not. Some people are living check to check, barely have the ability to pay rent and to do other things in their personal life, to then have to expect them on the front end to pay for not only travel in some circumstances, like with conferences. We even require reimbursement with conferences for travel and not on other things. But then to have to pay for this support. So that is not equitable. And which is why I did not propose it. And I also think that I think Chicago is a good example, especially for Evanston, because if we're only doing what's statutorily obligated, we would just be legislating, preparing for meetings and voting on things. And I think the history of this city, right, is about ward meetings and office hours. And, Councilmember Nusma is probably neck deep on an issue that if he really were just looking, doing his legislative responsibilities, would not be as deep as you are in the issue around the Marguerite Inn and other issues. So clearly in Evanston, I think there's an expectation both for this council, but also I think an expectation the community has for us to be involved, to get more involved and be involved in our community. We certainly campaigned around being more involved and active. I think all of us, in addition to our policy goals, also had a commitment to community engagement, and I want us to be able to fulfill that commitment. And so again, just to wrap this up, the only thing that I'm really asking for is that we forward this to council so that we can have this discussion alongside our budget discussion.
Okay, Councilmember Reed.
And I'll close out here. And I forgot to take note, but I wanted to address the Chicago comparison as well. I think Councilmember Burns hit it from one angle, and so I won't repeat that. Although I will add to that point, I know all of us get emails probably daily about some issue that, again, has nothing to do with our legislative responsibility, that has to do with, hey, I had this issue, with this city service, and, I need rat traps, or, there's a fountain coming out of my toilet because the city did sewer flushing recently. That's a real email and text I got today, and has been getting a lot recently. Trash shouldn't get picked up, a whole lot of things that have nothing to do with our legislative responsibilities, because we live so close to Chicago, and so many of our residents interact with Chicago. I think they have a similar expectation of us, that we engage in that way. But to get to the point that I wanted to raise that's different from Councilmember Burns, to illustrate the comparison is, up until this term, the mayor had a secretary, and Dar knows all about that. So we had a staff member who, yes, technically reported to the city manager and was technically directed by the city manager, but really, in all reality, reported to the mayor, and and was tasked with a number of things by the mayor, and so it's not unheard of for us to have staff that work very closely with council members or elected officials broadly, but are still within the legal confines of our city manager form of government. And so this would be very comparable to what we've had for decades with the mayor's secretary, very comparable to the powers that the city clerk has as an elected official to hire and fire staff, albeit their powers are not legislative. And again, this would be running through the current processes that we have set up under our form of government. The city manager would be approving it, and so I do think the Chicago comparison is a worthwhile comparison, particularly based on what I believe our residents expect and even our own history here in Evanston.
Okay, seeing no lights, I guess since this was for discussion, do we need a motion? That's it? So let's move on. Any items for communication? City manager? No? None? All right. Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Being no further business, Chair, you can adjourn us.
Okay. All right. We need to
You don't
just
have
a
to
voice
call-
vote?
You can just adjourn.
You can just adjourn.